In the name of one God, Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. Amen. Their nation was broken, demoralized, and shattered with loss after loss. They wondered where God could be in this sorrowful time, and wondered, too, how God could allow such awful things to happen to them. The people of Judah were in exile in Babylon, and they were in a state of despair. They had lost not only their land and their way of life, but their connection to God as well. They received word that the temple in Jerusalem, that place where heaven and earth meet, the place where God was present to his people, had been destroyed. Many wondered if their relationship with God could ever be repaired. The prophet Jeremiah had told them that this exile was their fault. They had broken their end of the covenant with God many times. They had oppressed their neighbors. They had worshipped idols. They were supposed to have acted differently because God had brought them up out of Egypt. Archbishop Desmond Tutu put it this way to a Sunday school class some years ago. He went through the Mosaic covenant step by step, explaining the promise of God, that God would rescue the Hebrew people from slavery, and that they would worship only God, and then act in ways that showed them to be a liberated people. When finished, to see if they understood, he asked the class to tell them what he had just said. He got a variety of attempts, some close and some not so close. But then one boy raised his hand and put it better than any theologian could have. He said, quoting God, "I saved your butts, so now go and behave." The people of Judah knew that they had not behaved, and that the situation they were now in was because of the way that they had been living. So when Jeremiah addressed the people with a new word from God that we heard this morning, how precious those words of comfort must have sounded to them. No longer haranguing them for their sins, no longer blaming them for their circumstances, Jeremiah now gives a word of hope. God will restore the people of Israel and Judah. Jeremiah declares that a new covenant will be made between God and the people. God will give them a second chance. Unlike the covenant made with Moses that was written on tablets of stone, the new covenant will be written on their hearts. It's important to understand that for the people of the ancient Near East, the heart was not just the seat of emotions. The heart was the core of a person's character and personality. And they were to be given a new heart. And the core of their new identity would be forgiveness. God would remember their sin no more. And furthermore, says God through the prophet, I will be their God, and they will be my people. Like our spiritual ancestors, we know sin and loss, and the feeling of having been abandoned. We can see all too well the suffering and brokenness of the world. We too may have wondered why God has allowed such heartbreaking tragedies to occur. And as in the case of our spiritual ancestors, some of the heartbreaks we suffer are because we too have broken our covenant with God. In response to that age-old question, why isn't God doing anything about the troubles in the world? Author Shane Claiborne writes that God responds, I did do something. I made you. but we have not been living in the ways that God intended for us. We have oppressed our neighbors. We have been indifferent to the injustices they suffer. Walter Brueggemann, commenting on this passage in Jeremiah, argues that one cannot know God without being attentive to the needs of the poor and the weak. He says these two things are synonymous. This is very similar to claims made about loving God in the New Testament. In 1 John, those who say, "I love God," and hate their brothers and sisters are liars. God's promise to the people of Judah was fulfilled in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. We who have been baptized into his death share in his life. We are made in the image of God, and now God's law of love is written on our hearts. This is the core of our identity as Christians. We are a forgiven people who have the love of God within us. God is the God of second chances, and third chances, and fourth chances. God is always seeking to be reconciled with us. Each day we can pray with the psalmist, "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me." Instead of rules imposed on us, we now have the Spirit of Jesus within us to free us from the sins that hold us back from living as fully as God intends. In today's gospel, we heard some Greeks that had heard about Jesus and asked his disciples for an introduction. They say to Philip, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus." May those who meet us see Jesus living in us and through us. May our words and actions so follow those of Jesus that people who have become estranged from God, people who wonder where God might be in the midst of all the disheartening events of our day, say, "I see Jesus." Create in us clean hearts, O God, and renew a right spirit within us. Amen.